Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, folks from all over the world, to D&D with ECI. In today's episode, we're going to take a look back into what we put up last week for you, which was a mock recording of a negotiation session. And we have with us today an expert. I want you to try and guess whom before we disclose the name. But what we're going to do today is we're going to have a YouTube-style reaction series while we go through the video recording of the mock negotiation that we have along with our expert and gather feedback and comments. What could we do better? What should we not have done? Anything that surprised us during the round, and overall impressions. Pay close attention because these are some very, very valuable tips, both for everyday negotiation and, of course, if you do tournaments and competitions, that in particular. With that, over to Ananya to introduce our guest for the day.
Thank you, Ramit, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Mr. Tom Valenti as our guest today. He will be helping us debrief the negotiation that took place last week. I really hope that you did get a chance to view that. Mr. Tom Valenti is a Chicago-based conflict resolution specialist offering mediation, arbitration, and facilitation services and training globally. A certified mediator, Mr. Tom has conducted numerous mediations involving civil, commercial, interpersonal, and workplace matters. Tom is a member of several bar associations, including the American, Chicago, Illinois, and the Indian Bar. He is also the co-founder and former board member of Mediation Beyond Borders. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on board with us, sir.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Or evening for you, morning for me. Hello, everyone.
Well, it is a global podcast, and thank you so much for coming here. So, Ramit, can you just walk us through what exactly will happen now?
Absolutely. So last week, we had some of our guests from Exfuria International's team itself record a mock negotiation round. Now, the role play for the round itself is something that we will share with you on our website. So please go visit and take a look if you're interested at all in the full details of the general information and confidential information. On the basis of the information provided, there was a 40-minute negotiation round that took place over Skype. It is an audio recording of this round today that we are going to witness firsthand along with Mr. Tom and respond to it and see exactly how the problem went and whether we really do meet all the expectations of the problem setter themselves. So with that, it's going to be very simple. I will be screen sharing the video from my side, and I'm going to hit pause whenever Tom requests and do a quick back and forth debrief about what went right and what went wrong. With that, unless anybody has any questions, I'm going to hit play. We're good to go? Okay. 3, 2, 1.
Hello. Hi, good evening.
Hello, Malin. Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm good. How have you been?
Good as well. Can you hear me well? Is the connection good?
Yeah, the connection is better. There was some disturbance in the start, but now it's stable now. Yes, I can very well hear you.
Great. So thank you very much for meeting with me today. Again, my name is Reginald, and I'm here today under my capacity as the chairperson of the Dystopian Chamber of Commerce. I'm very happy that we managed to hold this immediate emergency session. The last weeks of our cooperation have been very insightful, and with the latest updates, I'm really anticipating that we can find ways to look forward to help our beautiful nation overcoming the obstacles that the COVID has brought. And in order for us to be able to find the best possible solution, there are two main points I would like us to discuss. Do you agree?
Only your voice is breaking. Sorry, your voice is breaking.
Sorry. Is it better now?
Fine. Yeah, it's better now. It's better now. Yeah.
So I was saying that I'm very happy to be here today, and I really anticipate that we can find a solution to overcome the obstacles of that the corona has brought to our nation. And I was ready to share with you two basic points that I would like us to discuss today. The first of which being what the current status in Utopia is, and the second point would be the possible ways that our nation can follow to overcome the current struggles. Is there anything else that you would like us to touch upon today?
I think that's satisfactory enough. Apart from that, I think we can also touch upon
So let me make a couple of comments about what we did so far. I know it's very brief, but I just wanted to comment because this is the way we're working now, is online. And so you'll notice there was a little bit of a glitch at the beginning. We're checking sound, and that's what we have to do because we never are quite sure we're being heard. And it's good to do that at the beginning. Here's an example of, and I'm going to refer to the parties as the chamber and the government. And so the chamber representative, the female in the participant, took control at the beginning and was trying to set an agenda. Without a mediator, one of the parties can do that. And she told her negotiation counterpart that she had two things she wanted to discuss: the current status in Utopia and what we can do to overcome the struggle. But she also invited anything from the other side and checked back with him. Very good strategy on her part. Great opening. She's showing some collaboration, some trust. And the government responded by saying he's very interested in the conditions of the local industry. So we have two people right away that started in a collaborative mode, and both indicated that they had some questions of each other. They wanted to gather some information at the beginning. Let's resume it and see how they manage it going forward.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, so I totally agree, and I believe that really for us to have like further brainstorming options, and that for them to be likely acceptable and attractive to both of us, it would be very wise to focus on exchanging some information. So to start with what you already mentioned, could you please, I know that the government has been devising some plans lately to see what the reopening conditions, if this occurs, would be. Could you please share with me the recent updates on that matter?
Definitely, I can share that. And before I share that, there's like one thing I would like to set in context from my side, to be very clear about that, what my intentions are here today. First of all, like as you said, that I'm really happy that we are here today, and we've been collaborating for the past few weeks, and we've been actively working towards the betterment of our nation. And in the capacity of the elected head of the state of Ethiopia, I believe just in the best interest of all the people, be it the tourism industry, the local businessmen, and above all the people at hand. Their safety is of a primary utmost importance to me. I completely realize that. So just to give you an insight of what I feel very strongly about two issues, as the safety and about the condition of the local industries. So in my childhood, my parents, the way I was brought up, I was brought up by my parents. So my parents basically shopkeepers, right? They were shopkeepers, and they run a local business, right? We were not as good or not as thriving as the tourism industry running, but yes, we used to earn our daily bread, and we used to go out. We contributed to the economy, to the life of Ethiopia as much as we could. So coming to the table, what I believe, the history I've seen at hand, I've seen this country literally falling apart at the financial crisis of 2008 and then gaining ground again. I believe that the tourism industry is well cemented, right? I believe what needs to be supported at this particular juncture is a collaboration between the tourism industry and the local businesses, while keeping in mind the safety of the people as something that's very pivotal towards going forward. I believe that the basic notion which got me elected, that was to make Utopia great again. That's what I'd be following here today again. So what I believe, that we've been taking norms. I know they are kind of strict, they're kind of unprecedented in the history of Utopia. But to bring it up from the point of view of the government, the infrastructure we have, to very simply put it across the table, the number of beds we have in hotels are far, far more than the number we have in hospitals. If we do even have a single case of COVID in the country, we would not be able to sustain the health sector. The country would have an outbreak. And that is why we believe that these certain changes we have made, the certain changes of having social distancing in restaurants, and we do agree that while the expenses are high and the taxes are high, but this is something which we have to do. The instructions of wearing masks in public all the time, I know it somewhere interrupts or, dismantles the culture of tourism in the country. But this is something which is very necessary to keep the country safe and going forward. And that is the basic idea behind these restrictions imposed by the government. Although the government, I promise you, doesn't want to disrupt the industry doesn't want to disrupt any local businessmen in any manner. The Commerce Chambers knows it very well what our primary intention is. Our intention is to make the people happy, to help the country survive. It's our people above all, and that is why we value the safety that most.
Let me take another pause there. What we saw is the chamber had a question, and the answer came in the form of a brief segue or an opportunity to build some trust, create some shared understanding. So we have an elected government official who wanted to tell a story about his family being shopkeepers, trying to create some trust or identify with the interests of the chamber, who represents local businesses and large ones around the island as well. So a very good opportunity to create some trust building. Did you all notice too that our chamber representative was evidencing some very good active listening skills? She was making good eye contact. She was nodding her head. At times, she also smiled, which is one way to maybe perhaps acknowledge agreement without an interruption. And so we see some really good techniques. The gentleman from the government decided to move on a bit to talk about some of his primary interests, which is good to get on the table at the beginning. He talked about the tourism industry being cemented, but he wanted to make sure that local businesses were going to be able to survive. But then he couched all of this in his primary interest, which is the safety of the people on the island. And so we learned that safety was one of his primary interests, the health of everybody on the island. He also said something about we want to make everybody happy. Hard goal to set out for yourself in any negotiation, because happiness is really not the norm. But let's give him credit for at least interjecting that thought into the case. He brought up one of the primary concerns, which is the number of beds and how that might relate to safety. So he's identified some of his interests. He's tried to build some cooperation. Maybe he hasn't answered the question fully yet that was posed, but let's give the chamber an opportunity to follow up. Let's see what happens next.
Tom, just before we resume, I had a question.
Sure. And sorry, I meant to encourage both of you to participate in the feedback session as well. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So my question is that at the start, we hear the chambers giving some sort of an opening statement, which I would say was a little short at her end, and she sort of straight dived in into her interests, and then followed it up with a question that she asked the government. Now, the government, I felt, lost that opportunity to give an opening statement, which is why the government instead dived into giving a brief background of where he came from, his family, like you said, to build trust and credibility. But at the end of the day, ended up dodging the question that was posed to him by the chamber. So what do you think in this sort of condition wherein the opposition sometimes forgets to give you that opportunity to say your side or to describe your interest? What does one really do? Was it the correct stand that the government took, or should there have been a better start there?
And so everybody knows, I've had the benefit of the problem set and the confidentials as well. I wasn't sure whether this was the first time they met or whether this was an emergency meeting and they had met each other and had reviewed their positions already. But good point that do we really need an opening statement? Certainly in a competition setting, you almost mandatory, you have to do that, and that could be looked at as a failure on the part of the chamber. Very little bit of agenda setting without really identifying her interests and needs and what she hoped to get out of this session today. So if I was encouraging people to perform better in a competition, definitely make the opening statement or some version of it in competition. In a straight negotiation that's not in a competition setting, can't hurt you to make an opening statement, but probably not required. I think the dodge may have been unintentional because the country leader was my view of it is he had this story he wanted to tell, and he forgot about the question because he had a script, right? He wanted to personalize this somehow, and he was more intent on personalizing it and forgetting the communication aspect that he has a pending question that was important to the other side. And that speaks to keeping situationally aware, that we can have a script, but never lose track of the question because it can be interpreted as a dodge. And in a competition setting, that might affect your scores adversely if you appeared to be dodging that question. There was no reason for the dodge here. I think he had some good things to say. She has a good question. Does that cover it? Is that, yeah, Ramit?
Thank you. So indeed, that does cover our question quite thoroughly. What I was also wondering about is not only are we invested in our personal stories and, well, a script in this instance, but how much does body language matter? Because you've, of course, spoken to us about body language in general, but especially when you're working online and what you really have is a close-up of your face. Is it important to make eye contact? How much of an impact does body language tend to have in an online setting vis-a-vis real life?
I think it's important. I think when we started, and I've been doing online work for several years now, before the pandemic. And when we first started training people to use online tools, that was the complaint. Everybody said, well, you can't do it because we can't read body language. We can only see the face and all that. And we gradually had people convert to appreciating a platform like Zoom, where I can actually make eye contact with everybody at the same time by just looking at my camera. And in a room, I can only really look at one of you at a time, and I'm able to let people think that I'm looking at them each at the same time. We can also, unfortunately, be viewed in close-up by everyone, and so we have to be cautious about our own predilections or whatever, touching our face, or whatever we do normally gets magnified by that and is aware for everybody. And so we have to be cautious about it. But I think the online mechanisms do a good job of letting us see what's going on, especially if there's a distraction. If someone is looking down or away, you can pretty much tell if I'm not paying attention. You can see that I'm not looking at the camera any longer. And that gives each party, and in a mediated negotiation, gives the mediator an opportunity to make sure that one of the parties is not distracted. In the current times, there's lots of distractions we all have because we're usually at home. Perhaps there's children, perhaps there's a phone, perhaps there's something to be taken care of. And so we have to care for our participants to a little greater degree and be aware of that body language. One of the things I tell people is that some of the tools that we use for active listening, we think don't apply in an online mechanism. Such as moving closer to people or changing our tone of voice. And I actually can coach people to do the opposite. So I can teach them that I can actually online lean into the camera a bit and lower my voice. And that might create a connection. And most of us who usually work in a classroom setting or something like that, or our voices tend to be a bit louder, but we can create attention by changing our volume. And leaning in is something that might be similar to moving our chair closer to one of the participants. And sometimes we do that in a private session. In a joint session, in a mediation, we have to be very cautious about leaning in and all of that, because it can appear to be non-neutral or biased. And so we coach people to use that tool in a private session, in a caucus, not a conference, where I can actually bring you into a room and then lean in and say, so tell me what's going on. You seem a little bit upset. Lower my voice, try to create some other kind of connection. So all of that is part of a body language mindset that I think will all improve at as we work our way through using some online tool to have video conference negotiations, mediations, arbitrations, whatever they may be. We don't see the rest of anybody's body. Usually that's a criticism some people make, But I'm finding that if we see everybody, from, maybe for a guy, his first or second button above, we have enough of what we need in order to judge the level of participation. And I agree, if we could see everybody in full, that's a better mechanism. But I'm not going to use that as a fault, because it doesn't do us any good to look at faults. We should be looking at how to improve what we do online and take advantage of some of the tools that the online mechanisms make available to us.
Thank you for that response. If I may just ask a follow-up question, a very small one. So say in a physical setting, not in an online setting, how much do you think hand gestures make a difference to any conversation? Because a lot of us have the habit of continuously moving our hands while we're talking, maybe extending it, keeping it down, and mostly it's taught that you keep hands to yourself while talking and maybe just move it to a certain distance.
Hand gestures are a problem, right? I mean, a lot of us, because of our heritage, use our hands quite a bit. And the question is whether that becomes a distraction. The beauty of this is it allows me to see my own distraction, right? I can see myself now, and I can see that my hands are going all over. I'm trying to look at both of you, but I can see my hands. So Zoom, if we practice, we tell ourselves, watch yourself for a while. When I first started doing Zoom trainings, somebody said, well, can I turn my camera off? I don't like seeing myself on the screen. And I said, sure you can, but who's going to hire you as a mediator if they don't get to see you, right? So we have to get used to seeing ourselves on screen, and also get used to seeing what distractions we create on our own. And so we can begin to give ourselves a prompt or a tool, which is keep your hands on the desk. Some anchor like that we teach ourselves how to not distract. I think the use of an occasional hand gesture can be valuable to people, as long as it's not an aggressive one, as long as we're not doing this pointing and that kind of thing. But let's see what these folks do.
Sure.
I've listened to the audio. I haven't seen the video, so I'll pay more attention to their gestures and things like that as we go along.
Thank you. That'd be perfect.
Should we go ahead?
Yes.
So Marlene, I can understand from the tone of your voice that safety and the protection of the health of our nation is of utmost importance for you. And as well, something that's very important for you is the protection also of the local businesses, which should also progress together with the tourism industry. And I would like to highlight to this extent that our interests co-align with each other. The Chamber of Commerce really also wants that we find a measure that would be really able to guarantee that there is health and prosperity, and that our nation can go through these struggles with the most efficient way. So I really agree with you on this point.
Short comment, a good summary, and identifying common interests. Not really a reframe, a couple things she reframed, but basically it's a good example of a summary and an attempt early on in the negotiation to identify the common interests, which are safety, health, protection, local business, and the tourist industry as well. Let's move on.
That's great to hear. And I very well know that the Chamber of Commerce does hold those kind of views again. So coming on since we know that some of our views are aligned and we are moving towards a better direction in ways of a conversation, what do you think should be of the primary concern? What do you wish to discuss first? Do you have any kind of things in mind? What you wish to go forward first?
So I would like to discuss a bit more and ask some more questions on what you said regarding to the policies of the government right now. So I heard on what you said before that tourism is well cemented in Utopia and it needs to be further protected because as we both know, it's the #1 generator of the entire nation. Our entire economy is service-based and completely dependent on the steady flow of the tourists to survive. So, having set that ground on the importance of tourism, and having set also as a fundamental to our cooperation discussion that the public health and safety should be protected, you mentioned on masks and social distancing. So, could you please elaborate a bit more on the social distancing measures that the government is discussing, and if possible, give me an insight of how will these measures be able not to damage the tourism sector?
All right, so we're getting back to her question, but the question took too long to come out. If we're information gathering, I think the chamber could have done a better job of asking one question in a brief way. It rambled a bit, talked about other issues, and what she's really started out trying to say a few minutes back was, what's the current situation now? And now she seems to be asking about the specific policies about social distancing and masks. And I think we could very easily frame that question just like that. Can you identify two things for me? What are the current government policies for social distancing? Secondly, what are the current policies on mask wearing? And that would have created a more focused information gathering phase. Ananya and Romit, any thought?
I actually have a question on that. So you say that it is a better approach to maybe be extremely, I would say cutthroat, or just be extremely straight to the point when you're asking questions. So ask pointed questions, but would it appear aggressive if one asks too many pointed questions? Would it appear that they don't really want to sustain the relationship rather than just here for, say, commercial interests?
Good question. And so let me just talk briefly about direct and indirect questions. So a direct question is, what's the policy on wearing masks? An indirect question, I can soften that. It's a little bit less formal, and I can say, do you mind, sir, sharing with me what are the policies now on the wearing of masks? And it's the same question, but asked in an indirect way, and it softens a bit, not so much like litigation. And so, in my feedback summary, I was probably a little bit more aggressive and direct than I would have asked her to be. But for educational purposes, it was done to emphasize succinct questions to gather information. And so if I was asking the question, Ananya, I would follow your guidance. I would say, would you mind telling me a little bit more about A and B? Not what is this, what is that? Good point.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, definitely, I would go about that. So the basic measure of the government for social distancing, apart from maintaining social distancing at all certain times in public and even the private properties, the basic idea, especially in restaurants, malls, and all other tourism hotspots, is that we intend to maintain a minimum of 3 feet gap between tables, right? And that is something we believe is very important, firstly, because as prescribed by the World Health Organization, and many of its guidelines has been noted by various physicians all over the world and experts on COVID, that social distancing is something which is very necessary to flatten the curve to actually prevent the outbreak of this disease. So what the government was trying to, I do agree that a 2 feet or 1.5 feet might also suffice, but there's always a risk in that. And and the point here is that we as a government don't want to take that, because that risk, I do agree that it could in some ways, in some manners, might affect the tourism industry. I agree with that. But our point here is the safety of our people. Because if we take it lower than that 3 feet gap, we could risk transmission. And as I've stated earlier, transmission is something which we can't afford at this juncture, because tourists would be coming from all certain sections of the world, from the neighboring countries. And as we know, COVID is not isolated or not limited to a particular country. It's all over the world now. We have been safe till now, but that's because of the geographical location. And as the lockdowns all over the world are opening, and when tourism actually starts, which we want it to start, We need to go about it in a manner which protects our country first and our people first. I do believe that tourism is important. I do agree that service is the very base on which our country runs. But my intention as the government mandate, speak on behalf of the people. And on behalf of the people, I believe that what we can do from side government is that we can balance the tourism industry with these certain social distancing norms. And at the same time, what we can also do, the other objective of the government is to uplift the local industry, the local services under the guidance and of the Commerce Commission and under the support of the government, to which we can attain a balance between these industries. Right now, we have a 70 to 30% ratio. And if the local industries are not helped, this might even go down further. Our intention is to at least bring up a 60 to 40% ratio at the least. And if we can achieve that, I believe that we'll intend to maintain a balance.
Thank you very much for highlighting the importance of social distancing and how this should be guaranteed. And to this extent, I also believe, and the Chamber would also like to co-align with the instructions by the WHO and international community about the importance of social distancing. However, let me share with you a concern of mine to this matter. So, as you know, the island floor and the shopping space retails at our nation at a really high premium, and it's also taxed accordingly. So I think that the social distancing measures will create a very big paradox. Local businesses and tourism and the tourism infrastructure institutions will be able to open up their services, but because they would serve much less people and they would need to have like a lot of social distancing, there would be there would arise the need of huge costs for renting the land and the space, which I believe that this would create a very big problem, and not only for the tourism industry, but also for the local businesses, that, as you say, is something that we should protect. So don't you think that these measures would really like create tensions and would not allow in the end the local businesses to open, because they will not be able to afford to rent spaces and to rearrange their tables and their shops with social distancing measures?
So I'm going to pause here again. We had the government making very clear that the priority for the government is the health and safety of its citizens. What I was disappointed in this next step was that the chamber, to me, there's a missing question. When they asked about masks and they asked about social distancing, if you've read the confidentials, you know there's an issue about whether or not you too can get to the island due to travel restrictions. That hasn't been mentioned at all. And so I thought I was going to hear a question when we talked about the government guidelines and I can't tell from the facts whether it's a government restriction imposed by Utopia or other governments, but I believe that in order for the chamber to pursue their interest in having the band take over the island or whatever you want to call that big concert, we need to figure out, is there a government restriction that prevents that from happening? And so I think that issue was lost for some reason by the chamber. And I can tell you that in my recollection of the audio listening to it, it never comes up for the rest of the case either, that we never address that issue. And to me, that's one of the more important issues in the case, because you can't plan a concert if your own government is banning the travel in, or that you have some information as a government official that other countries, perhaps the country you too is from, you're not going to allow them in. And so I would have liked to see a little bit more information gathering geared to the confidentials, because that's an important element of the scenario here.
Tom, on
yes.
the basis of what you've just said, my understanding of the problem and the problem creator was that the lack of information regarding the ban on travel was left unfilled on purpose to give additional flexibility for the participants to decide how they wanted to spin that. So when there seems to be ambiguity of this sort within a negotiation problem, how can participants ideally figure out where they have wiggle room and where they do not? How do you decide when to take that sort of a risk and build upon the narrative you've already been given?
That's a really good question, because most competition rules say you can draw conclusions that don't alter the nature of the negotiation, and whatever conclusion is drawn by either party in this case would affect the negotiation itself. So I don't think in this utopia case we're allowed to say, based upon the vagueness of the drafting, we're allowed to say one side or the other. But what that says is that we are going to negotiate an alternative. Is that perhaps in this case, the parties would be able to negotiate: if you two can come, we can do this concert. If they can't come, we can do something else, and set up some deadlines. And perhaps the settlement is, if we're able to get them access to the island by a certain date, we'll do the concert. If not, we'll revert to something else. And so it gives wiggle room to negotiate alternative possible settlements. If you did that, no one's going to say you violated the confidentials, but probably you would get marked high, because you've recognized that some things, especially with a pandemic, some things we don't know what's going to happen. And so in this case, there should have been negotiations about unforeseen circumstances. Well, I don't even know if we can call it unforeseen nowadays, because we see lockdowns and re-lockdowns and all kinds of things. So we should be able to negotiate 2 or 3 different alternatives based upon what the virus is doing to Utopia and U2's home country. And so don't assume that they're going to get a visa, or whatever it is, or not have to quarantine. Maybe that's one of the alternatives. If they can come in, we have to figure out how to quarantine them. But I think most competitions would ban, or not ban, but frown upon either party saying anything that says there will be the ability of the band to enter, or there won't be the ability of the band to enter ever. Okay.
If I may just ask a couple of questions on this point. So 2 of them flow from our discussion before, and one is based on something that you said. So first is, I feel that the government kept avoiding the question even now. I think the commerce industry had asked a very, very 2-pointed questions, that what are the exact guidelines which are in place right now, and what are the number of masks which are required, and what is the situation with COVID right now. I think what the government kept doing is, instead of answering what exactly are the guidelines, he kept going into the reasoning as to why they require those guidelines. So he kept saying things like there's a transmission risk and we don't want to take that, but he never really spoke about the numbers. So I felt that this is where a lot of parties do end up getting confused in information gathering. They try to gather one point of information, but the conversation dwells into another way. So what is a good way to keep the opposition on track with what you're saying? Like you said, they never spoke about U2 and the travel restrictions that U2 has. And I feel that was a very important part of the negotiation, given the general information and confidential, but they just never came to that.
Okay, I read the facts as being a 3-foot rule in place, and masks while in public. And that's from the general facts. And so I believe, I didn't have the same impression of the government, because I believe he thought she understood those guidelines because they're in the general facts, and perhaps was trying to interpret her question as, do you have any wiggle room to 1.5 or whatever it is? And he started talking about that. I think his answer could have been very clear, is that it's 3 feet and masks everywhere. And so I'm not so sure why the question was asked, what policy is in place, because I read that as a given in the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why it's even an issue,
Mm-hmm.
because if you're having a concert, there are other issues that other ways to frame that question. Is there a way to social distance in a concert and a venue and all those kinds of things? But again, this negotiation veered away from those harder questions about how do we social distance if we have this giant concert. But is she getting the answer to the question that she asked? No, because it's not coming in a direct answer. The government could have simply replied as what we've published already is a, and then silence.
Right. I agree
She
with you.
interjected at this point the economic issue, which is moving, is advancing the negotiation to economics. Again, not having anything to do with a concert, but having to do with operations generally for her constituency. Might be a little bit too soon, but I think you'll see in the next vignette that we're going to move in that direction now, because as I recall, the government makes a specific response with a proposal. But let's watch it. Let me guess at what I think is coming next.
All right. Could I just ask a quick follow-up?
Yeah, you had another question too, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
So with respect to what we said about her or either parties coming to the travel restrictions on you two from traveling to their home country to Utopia, this is something which is given in the Commerce Minister's confidential information. And I believe that if she does reveal this information, it might make her case a little weaker, because the government anyway is against getting you two in on the island for the concert. And if she does reveal the fact that, but they might actually not come because due to certain travel restrictions, etc., it might make her case weaker, or it might perceive to make her case weaker. So what do you do in a situation like this? How much do you reveal? And I think this is something we spoke about before as well. How much is it, or how do you feel safe enough to give out that information?
I don't think she needs to give it out. I think there's enough cover in the case for her to ask a question on behalf of the tourist industry. Don't even mention you two. Say, if we're opening up, are you aware of any travel restrictions that are going to impact tourists from coming here?
Right.
It's going to have the same impact on you too. So you don't even have to mention you two. There's enough room to get the information without disclosing anything. And so I think that would have been a better approach. The release of confidential information or the use of it in a non-mediated negotiation is harder, because we don't get to share that with the neutral.
Right.
So it's hard to predict what the right answer is. But I just feel in this case, the issue of travel restrictions should have been discussed earlier on, because the only way to avoid the travel restriction issue is to agree with the government that it's going to be a COVID recovery island, and no travel restrictions will be placed on that. However, for me, it's hard to understand how there could be travel restrictions for you or I that impact us on the island or our relatives on the island, and then all of a sudden we're going to bring in a bunch of previously sick people and say there are no health and safety risks to bring those in. So there's a lot of room for discussion here that I don't think we're going to see, but because there's some inconsistencies that need to be talked through by the parties.
All right.
Let's see what happens next.
Thank you so much for bringing that aspect out of the table before me, Reginald. I agree. that every measure does have its pros and cons, and we can't view it in isolation, definitely. But as stated earlier, that we need to prioritize somewhere. And the government's priority lies in the safety of people. So regarding the social distancing requirements, I'm afraid that the government can't take the risk of reducing the distance, because that would risk the people's health utmost. What we can do, on the contrary, we can look over this in further discussions. We can take deliberations on this about the taxation system and the rates at which we charge the shopkeepers in the shop for the shopping spaces. We can look on these, and maybe we could adjust a temporary rate for the COVID time, for this era, while we return to a particular stage, a particular level, where the industry, with the economy is somewhere near to stable, where the coffers of the country have been filled to a certain degree, and then we can invoke the earlier tax regime, and we can probably work out a different tax regime specifically for the industry at this time. And while, as you mentioned, about the local industries, which very well go along with the goals I've had, I believe that we could provide certain compensations on behalf of the government as well as the Chamber of Commerce and the local businesses that would help them not only, go past these social distancing issues, but also help perform considerably well, keeping in information that there'll be less number of people and the other situations which have arisen during this particular pandemic.
Okay, so to make sure that we are on the same page as that, so social distancing is something that we should have, and if it should be, if it is on place, and if it is decided that the borders reopen, then the government would be willing to make to offer taxation benefits and compensation to businesses so that they can really co-align with the measures. Is that right?
Definitely, that's absolutely right. And these particular benefits, the intricacies of them, can be discussed over the course of other meetings with the chamber. And as we have been going forward in such a wonderful fashion to uphold our country and raise its prosperity to make it great again, and that's what has been my agenda from day one in this office. And that I'm glad we're going towards that direction. Yeah, please.
I'm also very happy for that, and I'm sure that we will be able to find a very fruitful solution. And also, we can have, after all, a creative solution that would meet all the fundamentals of our cooperation. So, apart from social distancing, which we agree that should be there, another worry that the chamber has is with the other measures that you have mentioned on prior weeks regarding the actions that you're planning to implement. So the requirement of the masks, for the requirement of masks, the chamber is really concerned regarding the other measures that you have announced on the prior 2 weeks. With regards to the masks, the chamber really considers that with the infringement that they pose to the freedom of expression, to the guests that really frequent our nation for Instagram shots and the beauty of the islands, this would be a problem. Also, we have highlighted the problem with the nightclub owners. I'm sure that the firm has also noticed the arrests that exist, which are still barred from opening, and the problems with public transport. I believe that these problems that exist would really make difficult the reopening of the nation and the economy. What's your opinion on that? How could we overcome this obstacle?
Definitely. I completely agree that there are certain issues which need to go about them, and the government knows the issues, right? The government have had to take in your reports from time to time, and I've worked on the commission's reports. And so, as relation to let me address all of these points specifically. In relation to the mask compulsion, so I won't be reiterating again how important safety is. And recently the World Health Organization also again reclaimed that it can be airborne as well. So I believe that masks is something we cannot forego as a requirement for the safety of our people and the tourists as well, right? As the tourists as well. So from that perspective, as we know that this COVID age, things it's bringing with each other, it's the new normal, right? Like we today sitting here having this meeting on a Zoom platform, this is something which we haven't thought, right? We always used to go to each other's office and simply talk. But right now, this is the new normal, right? This is something which we have accepted. Humans, as such, are creatures who accept and adapt. It's a simple principle of survival of the fittest. We adapt, and that's why we go along. Simply put, these masks are the requirement. These are the new. And frankly speaking, a day or two back, I saw my brother wearing these masks, and these pretty colorful masks which had patterns on them. And there was this mask with "Go Utopia," and that Utopia is great. And yeah, my government is even thinking about issuing masks to tourists which have emblems like "Make Utopia Great Again" and something like that. And
But
I've
don't you
seen that.
believe that tourists will not be happy anymore to wear masks? Because this would really, we know that, so if we analyze the data of tourists that visit our country, most of them are of young age. They're quite, they have, they can support traveling in such a luxury destination as our nation. And they really care about their social profile. And we have seen that they upload a lot of pictures on Instagram. And I think that as the status quo shows in most of the countries, and if we follow what the Instagram influencers post and everything, it's quite clear that there is a trend that masks is not something that people on Instagram want. And that's why we believe that, of course, we should adjust and everything, but we believe that if we want to protect tourism, wearing a mask and social distancing in Utopia would not be able to co-align with the needs of our tourists. And as a result, don't you believe that there would be a danger that these tourists would not visit our island anymore?
I get your point completely. So I get your point, Reginald. I get your point. But as I've said, this is the new normal, and the government is taking safety as its primary concern. And there are certain things which we really can't let go of, right? So mask is important. What we suggest, on the other hand, like while this is the new normal, I agree that this is not something which has been observed. I agree this is something unprecedented. But these masks can also be used as their freedom of expression. They can wear certain masks which they think suit the status quo. They can wear certain masks which express their feelings. And I believe while the entire world is imposing these measures, like wearing masks, social distancing in all parts of the world, I believe that even if we impose wearing masks in public, where people can, where mask restrictions cannot where we can wear these masks, it's something they'll already be accustomed to, and it won't be very difficult or something very new for them. I believe that even tourists who come from other countries, I think they'll already be accustomed to wearing masks in public, and that's why I think we should go beyond it, go with it. Obviously, and we'd also have to consider that right now there's a huge mask industry also coming up due to this COVID pandemic phase, that the creative, colorful masks all coming up, and I believe that gradually, not immediately, the people will take up to it, because what choice do we have?
So let's pause. A long discussion. This is a good example of a negotiation where there's a substantial imbalance of power. The government has made some policies. The screen is frozen. The gentleman has a smile on his face, but he's basically saying no. And the chamber has this very difficult position where they're trying to create revenue for their constituency, but at the same time ignoring a bit about the health and safety of their own people to bring tourists in from other countries. So in the case, a very difficult negotiation for the chamber. But to me, that's and in particular for the representative, right? I mean, she has a hard job. I mean, she's got a whole bunch of people. I presume she gets paid some salary to be there in this negotiation, but she's got the hard side of this case, right? Is what can she bring back to her people? And maybe it's the tax incentive for this other issue, or maybe there's something else that can come from a brainstorming session. But she's not hearing a lot of steps that support her efforts in this negotiation so far. What would we do to try to create something that she can bring back to her office and say health and safety is the priority of the government around the world? This is all going to be the norm. And I think she believes that as well, but she's got to argue for some other things. And as I listened to this segment before, and I saw the willingness of the government to throw on the table some tax incentives for land use costs and things like that, I was wondering what she was going to come up with as a possible financial incentive to her constituents about how they might create revenue out of the pandemic. We haven't heard that yet. I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen. But she's right now accepting no as the answer to everything, and not coming up with any proposal yet. Not even yet what are we going to do about the U2 concert? We know that U2 concert is on the table because it's in the general facts, but she hasn't asked yet what's going to be done. Can we do it? What are we going to do? Let's see where it goes. Any thoughts from Ananya or Ramit?
I do feel that certain aspects of the government's role remain unexplored from the confidential, which is something I would have expected to see carried forward, because the idea, of course, is to balance this negotiation as much as possible. So to have a slightly unreasonable government on the other side trying to find a compromise with what is in fact the economic behemoth and colossus that keeps this country running, the idea was that they would balance themselves out. But instead of seeming little like a dictator, if you do decide to be this congenial, it creates a difficult working environment, clearly.
Yeah. My thinking is, how do we use that congeniality to find out under what conditions we can have this concert and promote it and do all the things we need to do to have this great influx of foreign money, whatever you want to call it, into the local economy. And I haven't heard that question yet, is under what circumstances can this happen? Because it's good for everybody.
And this
Maybe
is
not
really
good for everybody, but she has to make that argument to bring a whole bunch of possibly sick people in. But I thought we were going to negotiate thermometer checks, testing, or will the government pay for testing, that we would end up negotiating those kinds of safety measures in order to bring fresh money onto the island. So there's a lot of room for that in the case, but the way we're managing the negotiation now, we're not getting to those very interesting negotiations that can be negotiations for public safety and revenue at the same time.
And this is really surprising, considering that the idea of inviting the band itself came from the Chamber of Commerce. So the decision to initiate that discussion should have really come out by now. But we haven't seen any movement on that front.
Yeah. We're 20, I timed this on my notes, but I can see from here, it's almost 24 minutes into the negotiation. There's about 15 or 16 left. And we haven't seen it yet. I would have liked to see it, and I think it's now a good time. Let me take one more minute. I think time management in competitions is our biggest concern as a party, as a mediators, everybody. And so we need to pay attention to time more than we do, because some of our best skills we don't have time to show. And in that case, it could be some innovative ideas, or this calls for maybe a brainstorming session of some kind about what are the circumstances under which we do that. And that could be quite interesting to assessors as well, but we're not there yet. But about competitions, I think there's a lot of unrealistic parameters put on. One is the length of the session itself. Secondly is the length of time we let the parties review the confidentials, right? And so we in our world, I have days or weeks to prepare for a negotiation, not 40 minutes or 60 or whatever it may be. And so our critique of this should always be taken with that in mind, is that there's not adequate time, or these competitions would take a year, right? I mean, if we gave people lots of time to prepare, they wouldn't be 3 or 4 days, they would be a long time between rounds and all that. So I don't want to appear to be overly harsh on our participants who are doing a great job, but we understand that they have limited time to prepare for this as well. Ready to move on? Anand, you think you have something? Yeah.
Yes, I have a question. I believe that what they were doing for the last, say, a good 5-6 minutes, were going back and forth on the fact that one of the parties was very adamant in the position that she doesn't want any masks at all. And the government was extremely adequate on coming up with these creative proposals that, all right, let's have things written in the mask, let's make it fancier, etc., etc. I believe that they shouldn't have wasted that much time on that, because I think from the first, say, 30 seconds, or even from the opening statements, it was pretty clear that the government will not budge from safety measures, and they will not budge from the fact that masks cannot be worn at all. So I think what should have instead be explored was, like you said, there should have been a discussion, or more like a brainstorm on what can be done with, say, the masks on, and what areas can we, say, for example, when I listen to this, and if I were to negotiate, maybe not in the time, but as a third person, I can say that a potential solution for this is to create areas on the island wherein a limited number of people would be allowed in that particular area, and they don't need to have masks, say, in that particular area. And that would take care of the government's interest of keeping people safe, and it would also take care of the ministry's interest of having pictures for Instagram, of increasing tourism, and all of that. So I feel this is a classic case of when they're stuck to their positions and not moving to their interests.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think?
I agree. I think they wasted way too much time on that. I thought one more point about it was that the chamber is kind of negotiating for the rights of other people, the tourists, not their members. And so I thought we were going to hear a conversation about perhaps the government offering a prize for the best Instagram photo with a mask on. Would you be willing to let them take a picture with the mask off? If it was socially distanced, could they do a before and after, and you're going to give a prize, and maybe you're going to help fund one of our local businesses or two to make masks, and maybe give them away at the airport. I thought we were going to have some kind of, what are you going to do for us to do this? Yeah. We can socially distance, but will you allow them to take one picture without the mask on? If they take one with it on or whatever, or give them $5,000, whatever you might be to encourage tourism. But that kind of brainstorming session could happen. There's no authority. The confidentials don't allow, they don't suggest any of that. But within the scope of our problem, we could have a very interesting session about how do we protect safety and then create an incentive for people to come. That still allows for freedom of expression. I thought the government made a good point, is make the mask an expression. He's talking about his party or what. But we could have a contest guidelines that take him away from promoting the country himself, or their own countries where they're visiting from, or something like that. But good point, Ananya. I think it was a bit of a waste of time.
All right, let's move on. Let's see what they do next. Thank you.
Pandemic.
Okay, I totally understand, and I can hear from the tone of your voice that mask is something that you would like to be implemented as a measure for public health. I would like to reiterate my concern that tourists, I agree with you that of course masks should be worn at all times. I also believe a lot that tourists will have a problem with implementing the measures, and I think that if we also see what happened during this summer of the coronavirus, there were many incidents that there were parties organized and tourists were not making the masks. So I would like to come up with a proposal for you. if you agree. So let's see what the fundamentals of our discussion have been so far. Social distancing should be there. Masks should be there. People should wear masks at all times when they're in public spaces.
Yeah.
And there is the danger that our tourism might be hurt with these measures, which would be catastrophic for the economy, since we already have a local production surplus of over 7%, and the rate of unemployment have risen alarmingly to over 60%. So I have a suggestion. Utopia. I believe that your government has shown that Utopia is an amazing place and that everything is possible. And this has been really portrayed by your government's organization through COVID, and how the local community has really helped the nation to overcome the struggles, and they are really united. So why don't we make Utopia a paradise and be a bit entrepreneurship to our approach towards fighting COVID? I would suggest that we can examine our invitation to the U2 ban, which in my opinion would bring unparalleled benefits for the nation. So I would suggest that we can discuss the option of not opening our borders yet, but of inviting these bands to the island so that they can rent our nation for a very short period of time, be responsible for the economic concerns, and really take care of all the economic concerns that our nation has, create a record that they want for their new album, and on the same time, we can see how we implement the social distancing measures and the mask wearing, and see what great benefits this measure would have for the economy and for the mental health of our citizens. Would you like to discuss this idea?
So I completely get your point, Reginald. I do. Believe me, I do. And I'm glad you realize the government's stance on the social distancing and masks. And while we are ready to provide tax benefits and discuss a lot of other proposals, this per se, Reginald, is not acceptable to the government. This per se is not acceptable to me as well. Because
Why is that?
I completely understand.
A flat out rejection, but a perfect response. Why is that? Let's see what he says.
I completely understand about the band, and it's a very famous rock band. I completely agree. I do listen to the songs as well. Definitely. I would be happy to, have them come here perform in Utopia and everything when things are better and everything else. We can have concerts. But Utopia is not for sale.
But this is not at all what the question here is. Nobody said that we would sell Utopia to nobody. Utopia sovereignty will be not damaged. We do not want to sell the island. I'm also, as a proud Utopian, I would never want this for my nation. What I'm saying is that we can allow a rock band that's so economically comfortable to come to our island, support the economy, and this way the tourism sector, the businesses will continue rising, and they will not be affected by the coronavirus. And after the post-COVID corona era, we would be a nation that would be really, really economically more affluent, and it would be able to really have a very prosperous future. And let me say some things about this idea. As you know, our economy right now is having like a very big problem with its foreign exchange, which is what really keeps generates the utopian economy going. So the YouTube band coming to the island and staying here over a period of time and recording would bring the forex back from disaster. And what would happen is that as a result of this action, the local tourism and the hospitality industry will really benefit a lot and profit for years to come. And let me give you an example. Have you watched the series or heard of the series Game of Thrones?
Yes, I have heard the name. I've not watched it, I've heard the name. It's pretty popular, I guess.
Yes, so Game of Thrones was very successful. Is very famous and as famous as our band is. And they have filmed their episodes in countries like Croatia, Northern Ireland, and Iceland. What has happened is that after the episodes in these locations have been filmed, these areas have seen an increase in tourism and in income. For example, according to Forbes, in Croatia, in Dubrovnik alone, there exists more than 4,500 tours about the Game of Thrones. So it is what I want to say is that such a decision will not only help Utopia be able to cater with its economic struggles right now, because as I mentioned before, U2 will really take care of any immediate economic concerns of the country. What it will do is also ensure and guarantee that we will have a very prosperous future.
So
Aren't these benefits great?
I agree. I get your point, Reginald. To the agreement part, I'll be coming. I get the point. I definitely get the point, and I'm happy that as a proud utopian, you're.
Let me stop it here because I think it's worth talking about how we frame a proposal, and let's chat a little bit about whether the proposal was explained in a way that acknowledged the interest and needs of the government. We know that the interest and needs of Utopia is to protect the health, and primarily to protect the health and safety of its citizens. And when the proposal was presented, it didn't clarify that. At some point, you could interpret this as someone's going to come and do a concert and bring a lot of people here, or it could be they're bringing only the essential people needed to create an album. And I think the facts suggest that it's the latter. It's that they're not going to do a concert. They're only going to bring in people and have access to places and locations that allow for the filming of an album, or these days, the album is always video and all that. So there's reasons for them to do it, and how that could promote tourism for Utopia in the future, much like Game of Thrones. So I think she lost the opportunity to cast the proposal as meeting the interests and needs of both parties. And that's the crux of interest-based negotiation, is that we gather information to frame a proposal that meets both sides' needs and interests. And this proposal can create a lot of revenue for the island, perhaps even tax revenue, and certainly revenue for the hotels and service all of those who service it, while at the same time doing that not at the risk of bringing tourists in. And so had she framed it that way, it would be a more difficult response for the government, because it meets all of their needs and interests as well. It creates revenue and opens the border only for a certain number of people and protects the citizens. But I'm happy to hear from Ananya and Ramit about that as well. It is, I think it's a really interesting proposal to solve the Utopia problem. But I don't think it's being well received, and I'm wondering why it wasn't well received.
So if I may, thank you.
No,
I feel for two reasons. First is that, like you said, she did not include the interests of the government. I think even her example about Game of Thrones was extremely focused on improving the industry, bringing in foreign exchange, which I don't feel has been highlighted as an interest of the government throughout the negotiation till now. And the whole point of the information gathering at the start was to identify the broad interest, which is, I think, safety for the government. Secondly, I feel that the example that she gave was extremely easy to negate, because she spoke about Game of Thrones, a series which was filmed when the pandemic didn't exist. It was filmed at a time when people were traveling and it was easier to get to place. So I think her idea of improving tourism and improving the tourism industry does not appeal to the government, because I think it's a very logical stance that nobody can travel. Regardless, you open your borders, no one's going to come except what the government, I think one of the government's confidential says that they want to open it up for people, the uber rich who can afford to sort of fly into private jets and then quarantine themselves on this island. So I think that proposal makes sense because those are the people who can actually travel. The middle class or usual tourists just cannot travel. So again, very easy to negate the proposal. So like you said, I feel a proposal should be framed in a manner which makes it hard for the other party to say no without appearing rude. What do you think, Ramit?
What I feel in this instance is the importance of framing this problem, of course, exists, but beyond that, there have been wasted opportunities in the round as time has proceeded to highlight common concerns, because both the confidentials for both sides actually point out that the nation is careening towards a fiscal deficit. And that's a problem that parties need to solve, and they are each independent stakeholders here. So instead of, say, advocating on behalf of tourists, it would have been helpful at this point to have acknowledged that this is an imminent problem and lived reality that the two of us will have to deal with, because you at large are the head of state and I am responsible for the commercial side of things in this country. So that really went unacknowledged in the past, which means the impact of this proposal and what it has, both in terms of tourism and revenue generation, falls flat because it hasn't been developed enough to have an impact at all.
Well said. So here's what we can be thinking about is our problem, right? Is how do we manage the health and safety of our population and bring in an influx of money without risking our citizens to a pandemic? Sir, you and I both have, I'm speaking as if I'm the yes. chamber, you and I both have the same interest, and we both have the same problem. How do we do that? If we bring tourists in, we're increasing a health and safety risk, plus we have to market to 10,000 people, and they have to bear an expense. What if we could think of a way where we can market to one group and bring a whole bunch of money in that doesn't impact the health and safety of our citizens by introducing 10,000 visitors over the next 90 days. And it has to be over the next 90 days because we have this Forex problem. We need money now. I know you don't want to go to the World Bank and get a loan, blah, blah, blah. And so all of a sudden, we've identified the common interests and given a pretty common sense approach is if we already have the opportunity to meet the needs and interests of both parties, shouldn't we just be discussing it? What's wrong with it? And so how we frame that could be part persuasion, in part relying upon or linking back to the government's interests and right. needs. And he has a proposal too, we know, and it may be accomplish the same interests and needs, but she has the advantage that she's going first, and we know the value of anchoring in negotiation. Mm-hmm. And rightfully so, she came out with it finally. I think it should have been earlier in the session, but I think he's a bit tough, right? We'll see what he does next. But I think, without being too harsh, I think if we look at this as a learning example of how we frame a proposal, and I always tell people that we want to do a SMART analysis, S-M-A-R-T, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And so to try to tie all those elements into this proposal would make it a little bit tighter as well. But some of those facts aren't in the case to make it time-bound and all that. We do know there's an urgency to this. But those are my thoughts about making an offer, making a first offer, and how we frame our offers or proposals.
I think some very pertinent points have been raised, and it is very important to now think about how do you place the offer. It's the same idea which she said, but you placed it in a manner which sounded really incentive for the government as well. So thank you for that. I think that's very important.
And really, the end result of all that is when it's all over, we haven't risked our citizens, but with the production of, maybe that's the time later on to talk about Game of Thrones, what's the economic impact as a result of doing this? Revenue now, but perhaps a revenue stream when the pandemic settles down and the borders are open. We have people around the world that want to come to Utopia. And that's a way to manage something like Ramit says, not right away, or we don't want to, I think Ananya, you said, don't mention Game of Thrones now, but it's an example to use maybe in 5 or 6 minutes. Should we move on? Yeah.
Yes.
Working in all directions to help our country to achieve its great status again. So what I would like to state here completely is that the shooting of Game of Thrones in these particular countries, which and due to that they were in popularity, certainly that's great. And as I said, it's absolutely fine that we can get this banned, YouTube banned later at a point of time, or maybe when we're developing and give them come and give some performances. But what's not acceptable to the government at hand is that the agreement here is about renting the country. And that is something which we feel is very problematic per se. Because while I do completely realize that it will be great, people will, love it and, they'll like it and there'll be increases. The particular lines of renting the country is something which goes against my very principles. It's
I'm
something
very sorry, Marlene, that if this made you feel uncomfortable, and it was not at all in my intention to suggest something that's against your principles. But I'm very happy that I know this now that this is not something that you would like to discuss. So let me suggest something to this point. Since you mentioned that you like the idea of our cooperation with the band, and you like the idea of the benefits and that they come to the island and everything, but the whole problem is the renting of the island. Why don't we do something else? Why don't we sign a contract with the group that they can come to the island for a specific amount of time, and they can, the contract would have all the terms that would be favorable for us, which would be that they would pay for, they would enhance our foreign exchange, they will support the economy by giving us money for the local businesses. We, in exchange, would give them the freedom to shoot their album, and this would be in a contract which would not be rent, but I suggest that the government in exchange could sign in the contract a term that would say that for the period that the album would be shot, the borders will not open to other countries, so that our main cooperation would be with the group. This way, we're not affecting the sovereignty of the country, and on exchange, we are having a group on the island which will pay for all of our financial problems, and it would give us a great future. What about this idea?
All right. I completely agree that's about the favorable things, and that it sounds really great, but at the end of the day, when we say that we have been collaborating with this particular band and we are closing borders for everyone else, we are limiting our ability for the other tourists for a certain space of time just because a particular band is there in our country. And from the
Aren't the borders already closed?
It's definitely closed, but when we specify that we are opening specifically for them, it's something which I believe could come across as statement as problematic. On the other hand, while I do really appreciate your suggestion of the ban, and there's something the government would like to propose at this juncture, which including your proposal. What we want to do at this particular time, right, as you said.
So just a quick comment. So why is he so against the government is not for sale or rent? For those of you who've read it, in the confidentials for the government, there's a history in prior governments of maybe some corruption or the government being for sale. So maybe he's overplaying in role the sensitivity to that issue with it that causes him just to shut down. Because we can see here, words are important. First, he says the government's not for sale, and then he's reacting a little bit too strongly to this idea that we're going to rent the country out for some purpose, when in fact that's what he really wants to happen for his citizens. He wants some money being brought in. So he might be overcompensating for that one issue in the case to shut her down. Plus, he has this other idea that's going to come out now. But my point is, there's a basis for his response to say, we're not for sale, we're not for rent.
Just a very quick question. Do you feel that on-site government, he hasn't been completely honest about his interest from the very start? Because till now, and even with our prior discussion, what we'd understood as his interest was that the safety of his citizens is sort of his main priority. But now he's coming down to saying that I don't want to ruin the sovereignty of the government. I want to take care. I want to protect his position in the government, and et cetera, et cetera. So do you feel that this is something which he should have ideally mentioned at the start?
Absolutely, because the health and safety of his citizens was in a sense protected by this proposal, and he didn't respond to it. And she could have said, doesn't it meet the health and safety needs of our country? He's responding to it about rent or sale or something like that. So it's disingenuous for him to say, I'm not going to do it because it looks bad, because that is not one of the interests that he identified already. And
yeah.
So good point. It shouldn't be that harsh to demand an automatic no. The answer should be, it doesn't meet my interests and needs for these reasons. Mm-hmm. And we didn't hear that. Ramit? Yeah.
A curious reason why I think this kind of reaction is happening more and more frequently now is how you decide to prioritize not just your interests, but also your character building and analysis. Because certainly it helps in a negotiation or a mediation if you're being receptive and responsive to the other person. But in a competition and a role play, that is not necessarily the frame of mind you're assigned to work with. So what we see here is the government actually leaning into the description of what they're really supposed to be doing in the confidential, and the prioritization of that form of acting at this point is misplaced, because if it's not been happening throughout the round, it throws the other party off, and at the same time prevents you from fairly evaluating fairly constructive proposals that have developed in the short time span.
Yeah, good point. I think he could have said that my concern about this kind of an arrangement, whatever you want to call it, this deal with you two, is that I don't want it to be perceived that the government is corrupt and is negotiating some deal with one person. I don't have that when we bring tourists in, but is there a way we can make sure that I don't look like a corrupt leader of a country by making this kind of a deal? And that conversation could be something as simple as, we'll bring in an outside agency to negotiate the contract, whatever it may be. There's some buffer between head of state and band manager or whoever it is, and ensure that his reputation is protected, because reputation is important. Mm-hmm. And he never has used the word reputation, but that seems to be what he's focused on now, even though it never came up so far. And if he identified that interest earlier, the proposal might have included some monitoring agency or something that could protect his interest.
Just a very quick follow-up on what we've discussed. Do you think that it would be appropriate, and should one do this even in real life or in competition? Should the commerce minister point it out or sort of call out the government head on this particular point, that this is something which wasn't introduced to me at the start and I wasn't aware about this, maybe we can work around this? Because what I feel right now is they're coming up with these new interests, but nobody's really addressing them. Like, she came up with a great proposal in the second half, and she did really frame it in a manner which looks lucrative for both of them, but she's not addressing it directly. She's not saying that you didn't mention this before, and now that you have, that's okay, we can include it in what we've already discussed.
Yeah, I think she's completely unaware of it because I believe it's in his confidential, this notion about things for sale. And so if in the perfect negotiation, someone might be able to ask, because we seem to have met all the needs and interests that we've identified so far, I'm surprised by your outright rejection of it. Is there something else on your mind that I don't know about that we may be able to accommodate by adjusting the proposal? And ask, it's a direct question framed indirectly to see if we can get him to say that.
Right.
Because she's blind to it by the problem. Yeah, yeah. And a good way to draft it, because if, you know, when we draft problems, we draft obstacles for each side. And one of the obstacles that the problem drafter might have had in mind in this case is, how do we test the skills of the chamber to smoke out or to get at that issue? Is there something else here that's in his mind? And what questions can I frame to get that out? In advance, we couldn't, in our prep for this case, we wouldn't have included that. So it would have to be an on-the-spot question. But it's a good negotiation challenge in this round, or in this example, to see if we can get at that. Because I think there's a way to negotiate a solution for this U2 thing that protects everybody. Because to me, well, let it go on, and at the end we can comment. I think he's going to make his proposal because he outright rejected what's going on.
That we should go about this recovery in an entrepreneurship fashion. What we propose to do is that we very well know that the tourism space, the hotels and everything, it's huge, it's large. There are too many beds, there are too many facilities, great world-class facilities in Utopia, right? What the government, in a manner, what proceeds to do is that, what if we make Utopia a haven of recovery?
Sorry, I have a note.
A haven of recovery, where people from the neighboring countries, they can come and let's say they want to recover just from the fatigue or from the normal lifestyle which they have been living, right? Just to come here and, you know, and even let's say, even if a certain issue, let's say even they are undergoing treatment or something and they are post the treatment phase, they can just come to Utopia. We'll arrange for the infrastructure from these hotels, which already have world-class facilities. We'll sign MOUs with them that in this particular agreement that we'll be using the infrastructure, and the amount of profits that we receive from these tourists, a certain amount will be given to them as well. And while we do all this, we can also call the U2 band to perform in our country. We open our borders for them. We open our borders for the world, but we open it in a manner as we want to. We open it clearly for them. I know there are a lot of details to this. I know there are a lot of intricacies to be discussed to this. And I completely realize that this is something which is a base, and we need to discuss through a lot of things, but this is something I believe can solve all our problems. We can get the economic relief from this. We can get the popularity from the youth band for this. We can get these reputation of a recovery country for Utopia from this. And that's what I believe satisfies all of this. And this would also help our local industries develop from the popularity, from the recovery point of view, since other tourists will be coming and open up a lot of more avenues, just than simply, you know, getting the compensation from the band or something like this. This is, I believe, a wholesome agreement. And while I believe there's a lot of things to be discussed, I would really appreciate if you at least consider this, Reginald. And we can obviously go over through the intricacies or the other plans, and, mixing up our plans together into something wholesome for Utopia over the other coming sessions.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your creativity, and I really appreciate how you are trying to really accommodate also the suggestions of the chamber towards finding a solution for the COVID crisis. So just to you know that as I told you on our prior correspondence, I have a meeting at 12.
I'm going to stop it there because I think we can say the same thing about his proposal. It wasn't framed with any recognition of the interest and needs. How does this proposal meet the interests and needs of the health and safety of the country? And one could argue that bringing a bunch of people who had COVID is not really in the interest of the citizens of that country, but he didn't frame it in a way that made anybody feel comfortable that those interests were protected. Nor was this proposal as far advanced as the chambers, because they had conversations already with the band. But he is talking about bringing a bunch of people from a bunch of unnamed countries. Who's going to pay for them? How long are they going to be there? And will the service personnel actually be willing to work with known people in recovery? So not framed really well either. But he didn't have, there was no other data to do it, and no time frame either. I mean, it really isn't concrete. It's an interesting idea. But then he went on to say, plus we're going to have a concert, not do a video, but have a concert. And never addressed who's going to attend a concert and stand 6 feet apart or 3 feet, but whatever the rules are, and wear masks and all of that. So his proposal actually was encouraging them to do things that are hard to enforce. And he's the one who said, we got to have them. And so not a well-framed proposal from that side either. Interesting to hear other comments about that.
So the proposal, of course, seems rather rushed in the manner in which it's been presented. But beyond that, I do know that the idea of turning Utopia into a haven of recovery is something that's present in the confidential for the state and the government. So I cannot but help wonder whether bringing this up this late into the round with minutes to go is some sort of a move to pressure the other side into accepting this as a possible compromise or agreement. Do you think this is a reasonable strategy to ever employ?
No, I'm not sure why neither of the ideas of the U2 or the recovery or haven didn't come up earlier in the round. But I think he's just running out of time, so he throws it out there. It certainly was the proposal that he was told in the case to advance, but it wasn't advanced in a way that had a methodology or a strategy or a plan to it. By building on somehow creating revenue for people in a safe and healthy way. And as presented, it didn't do that. And I think he just ran out of time. And that's because we allotted 40 minutes or whatever it was to him.
So from what I gather with this discussion is that it isn't wise to drop offers at the last minute just because you're running out of time, especially in a competition setting. I feel like from experience, I've seen a lot of parties just bring in offers and they tend to agree with them as well because they just feel that the round becomes better or their negotiation becomes better if they end up coming to a conclusive sort of solution.
In fact, some of the instances within which I've really been frowned upon as a mediator is whenever this happens at the last minute and you have to step in and force parties to reality and say, are you sure this is something you want to bring now? Do you think it is viable? Here are 6 things that you should probably discuss related to this and take it up next time. And they never appreciate you for doing that.
Yeah, no, good point, because it's really our responsibility as a mediator, our duty really to make sure that someone isn't rushed into something. And good point, Ramit. I think there's just a couple minutes left. Let's play it out and then, because I think they're just at this wrap up stage anyway, but let's see what the ending looks like.
Talk at the chamber. So just to make sure that I can wrap up and so that we're on the same page of the meeting. you suggested that we make, so we have discussed the fundamentals of any measure, which would be social distancing and mask wearing. And we have discussed the possibility that the YouTube ban comes to our nations of field. And you have suggested that utopia is will become a heaven of recovery, and at the same time signing memorandum of understanding with local businesses and people that come to recover. And we would, on the same time, invite the YouTube band to perform for a certain period of time. So I think that this is a great suggestion. I would like to take it back to me, with me at the chamber and discuss it with my colleagues. And I would like to ask you if we can schedule a meeting again over the next 2 days so that we can discuss more onto this proposal.
Definitely, that would be great. Really appreciate it.
Great, thank you so much. I'm very happy to see that we're working towards reaching a solution that really would support local businesses and would have this huge benefit for the future of the country with the YouTube ban. I think this is going to be a very nice
Definitely,
idea.
I'm here to make utopia great again, whatever it takes.
And utopia, you know, everything is possible. So
everything is possible. It's the utopian dream, after all.
So
and dreams don't die. Again? Definitely, we shall schedule a convenient time, which is convenient for both of us, very soon in this week.
Would Monday morning fit for you?
I'll check it with my assistant and let you know by mail. That works?
Okay, great. I would be expecting then an email from your assistant.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you so much again. Have a nice day.
You too. Please take care.
Thank you.
So even in the end, the leader of the government has to show his power by saying, "I'll check with my assistant." And he played the role very well. A good one final thought about just that little 2-minute end. The chamber, really good summarizer, and she showed us that a few times during the course, and that's a skill in a non-mediated negotiation for us to use as negotiators, and for those of us who are fascinated by the role of the mediator, she gives a good example on how a mediator might use those summarizing skills from time to time during sessions too. I would have cautioned her. She said this was a really great proposal, and I think people value the importance of words, and so she kind of bound herself. I'm going to take this back to my people, but she already said it was great. And so you might say interesting rather than great. I'll see how my people think about it. But once she said the word great, that might create an optimism. Not that it hurts anything in a negotiation, because nothing's done until it's done. But she was happy and enthusiastic, I think, because the round was coming to an end, not because that proposal was so great. But that's my reflection on just that last 2 minutes.
Well, that's brilliant. I think we've had a very thorough debrief of what a negotiation did look like and what they could have done better, and where are the places where they might, where are the places where they did pretty well, actually. So I think it is this overhaul which really does help one while preparing for a negotiation, whether it be a business negotiation, whether it be a competition. I think I can speak from experience, having done some of the biggest competition in the world. It is very difficult when it comes to preparing for these competitions, as to know or as to think, what is it that is expected out of you? I think as students, we come in with these different notions which are taught to us by our seniors, our faculty members, some trainings that we might have taken, and there's no sort of overhaul, or shall I say that there's no one answer to a lot of things. And I think by our discussion today, we have broadly discussed 3 different perspectives on the same problem. And I believe that we've agreed on most things, because an interest-based negotiation is supposed to work in a certain way. And there are certain tools and certain things which you can do to enhance your performance and enhance the overall negotiation altogether. So with that, Ramit, do you have anything to say about what you feel is the importance of having such sessions?
Not much, really. I echo your sentiments, Ananya, and this has been a very, very long session. So we'd like to thank our listeners for their patience with staying with us, and we really wouldn't dare to add anything more to what Tom has to say. So please do lean on Ananya for the brilliant summary that she's provided, and give this episode another listen. I'm sure it's worth listening to again and again. So keep rewinding until we come back next week with another episode. Thank you very much and have a great day.